Hey everyone, welcome to Maven and happy Pride Month. I'm so excited to have you here. If it's your first time, welcome. So excited to see you. And if it's your 20th time or your 30th time, welcome back. We've missed you. I'm really excited to introduce Asher Gellis today. He's the founder and CEO of JQ International, which is an LGBTQ plus and ally Jewish nonprofit here in LA that creates community through identity building programs, provides education and LGBTQ plus inclusion training, and nationally supported services and resources. Asher earned his BA in political theory from UCLA and MBA from Pepperdine University. Prior to launching JQ, Asher was the regional director for Hadassah Young Judea in California, Nevada, and Hawaii. Asher has participated in the inaugural cohorts of Present Tense LA Fellowship and the American Jewish World Service Global Justice Fellowship. He's on the global think tank of LGBTQ plus and ally Jewish life and community advisory board of Southern California Media Group. And currently he serves as a consultant on inclusion and community building. Asher, welcome. We are thrilled to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So we're just going to kick it off. I'm sure a lot of times, you'll ask other folks that are joining your community, tell me your journey. Where did you come from? How did you get here? I'm going to flip the script and ask you, how did you get here? Tell me your Jewish journey and tell me about the inception of JQ International.
My pleasure. I would be thrilled to share. I grew up here in Los Angeles. I had an amazing Jewish experience growing up, from being a part of a conservative community, conservative synagogue, and Jewish day school experience. I had, my brother and I both had the privilege of growing up in this amazing Jewish bubble that really surrounded us with really great role models and values. But around age 12, I realized there was something different about me than my peers that were around me. And I didn't really know how to articulate it or even how to process it. I just knew that I was different. I did feel a bit of, I did experience a lot of bullying around this age because I was a little more emotional and effeminate than my peers. And I was being called gay on the playground, but didn't even know what it meant yet.
Oh my gosh.
And I suffered kind of in silence for about, a decade before I would actually finally come out as a young adult. And that road included me seeking out community in the LGBTQ space, and something that was similar to the amazing experience I had growing up with the Jewish space I had. But because I was raised in this amazing experience growing up with all these great Jewish, values and Jewish role models, but I didn't have an LGBTQ role model or LGBTQ Jewish role models in my life, I really had this sort of unintentional message delivered to me that I didn't have a place in the community. And so I felt very fractured in my identity and felt like I had to pick and choose. And so when coming out and seeking out community, I was seeking out community like I was raised in, but the LGBTQ community that exists out there isn't as dynamic, in my opinion, as what the Jewish community has to offer. Whilst trying to seek out community, I just felt when entering Jewish spaces, I'd have to show up my queer identity. And when entering queer spaces, I'd have to show up my Jewish identity. And there was just no place for me to be fully whole. And so that's how JQ was conceived of. I wanted to bring both of my worlds together, create a space for LGBTQ Jews, or back in the day, just gay and lesbian, we didn't have the vocabulary yet, to come together and feel a sense of wholeness and community where we could bring in a lot of the experiences we had growing up in our Jewish community.
That's incredible. And I really feel like you pinpointed an avenue that was, something you're passionate about. And I'm sure there are so many others who felt the very same way. And so, since JQ International's inception, since you began it, since you founded it, how has it evolved over the years? And remind me, what year was it founded?
2003, 2004
Okay.
was sort of in the works, but our actual, all of our paperwork got approved and everything in, I think, November of 2004. So we are now 19 years.
Oh my gosh, you're legal. Exciting.
Yes, legal. Yeah, soon the organization can drink. So I would say that it has grown a lot over the years. You know, in the original founding years, it was really a safe space for us to come together and build community and feel community and see ourselves reflected. I can tell you that in the early years, we'd have 100, people show up for an event. 3 of them would be women. Those 3 women wouldn't come back again because they didn't see themselves reflected. It was clear that that there was a need for individuals to see themselves reflected. We decided to invest in our women in our community and build a women's involvement committee, which was tasked with creating women specific programs and elevate women onto our board and in pipelines. It was very successful. With half a year into that project, we'd have 150 people in an event, 100 of them would be men and 50 would be women. And it was a very quick change. And that was through very generous funding from the Jewish Community Foundation in Los Angeles that invested in us doing our sort of capacity building around our mission. We have followed that same model over the years to offer Persian programming, Orthodox, not trans and non-binary. But the more we build community, the more we hear that same message that I shared a second ago, which was great Jewish experience growing up, but no LGBTQ role models. And all of us feeling very fractured and split at the root. And so as we grew in size, we decided it wasn't enough. We were creating this safe space for ourselves. We need to go back into our communities that we were raised in and be advocates for change. And we started training our speakers and individuals with great stories to go back in and be those visible role models and advocate for more visibility within the Jewish spaces that we all came from. That was a little bit of an uphill battle, I can tell you that, going in 15 years ago into Jewish institutions is entirely different than it is today. There was a lot of hostility towards us, a lot of treating us as if we were doing something that was hurting Judaism, and also that we were exposing children to something that wasn't appropriate when all we were talking about was sharing our stories of feeling split at the root and what are the values of inclusion. And we would run the program for the clergy and educators, and they would sign off, and then they'd have the youth commission come, the parents come and see the program, and they would sign off but require a note to go home to parents. The note would go home to parents. Maybe 5 of the 30 kids would show up that day. So we've come a long way doing a lot of advocacy work, and really that reality has changed. We've really shifted the paradigm in the Jewish community to be far more inclusive. And through all of that work, I will say it led to our third piece of our work, which is our support and wellness. And the more we were visible, the more individuals from the Jewish world were turning to us, asking for us to help. And we launched our helpline and our support services and our support groups and our psychoeducational workshops. So it's been an amazing, year after year of growth and more people being served and more dynamic programming. And also we've really been partners in working with the Jewish community as they're shifting their priorities of inclusion, which I'm very grateful for.
Very important. And circling back to, those programs that you were doing, going into the synagogues and sharing your stories, is that still an active program today?
Yes. In fact, we actually just graduated a cohort of JQ advocates, individuals who signed up as volunteers to go through a very comprehensive program of learning public speaking, advocacy, LGBTQ 101, understanding how to, really craft their story and do a call to action. And we just had a cohort that just graduated, which was perfect in time for Pride, because in Pride month of June, we do get lots of requests from synagogues and Jewish institutions to send speakers. And now we have a whole new class of people with really impactful stories.
Awesome.
So that work continues to thrive.
And is this happening on a national level now that, COVID has shown us the way of Zoom and virtual opportunities?
Absolutely. And actually, what's interesting about this whole Zoom phenomenon, which, I had a Zoom account before COVID, but honestly, Zoom became our reality for so long. The fact that we had that tool was a lifesaver and a game changer for so many people in our community. We were able to not just offer a lot of our community building programs via Zoom for people to join while they were stuck at home during lockdown, but we were able to roll out a significant number of support groups that were very identity specific or needs based, many of which had waiting lists to participate in because we needed to cap them for purposes of making sure that the environment was, properly being managed. But it has given us a reach that is amazing from, parents in Oklahoma to a queer kid in wherever they might be, Colorado, whatnot. Having access to life-saving support services has been an amazing opportunity for us to really roll out into the community nationally.
Definitely. That's incredible. You touched on when we were talking kind of about the evolution of JQ International, you touched on how, mental illness and, support groups for folks is so needed right now and something that you're tackling. Can you share some insights into the unique mental health challenges that are faced by individuals in the LGBTQ plus community and in turn share how the Jewish community can address these challenges and provide adequate support?
Great question. There's no question. The studies show that the LGBTQ community is at higher risk for so many scenarios of self-destructive behavior to challenges that are affecting them, mentally or emotionally also in terms of like their careers and whatnot. The fact that anyone has to even come out just means there's an automatic rejection of their identity, which affects their self-esteem, their capacity, how they're functioning, as well as leads to, again, self-destructive behaviors. And so the more that we can create affirming spaces, the more we're able to reduce that. Now, I just want to name that LGBTQ people are not predisposed to self-destructive behaviors because they're LGBTQ. They are predisposed to these they are more inclined and more likely to suffer from these self-destructive behaviors and or suffer from mental anguish because of how the world is treating them for being LGBTQ. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important as we move into sort of the next phase of what it looks like to understand inclusion, that we understand that we have to take proactive steps of really lifting up the LGBTQ community. It can't be something we hold in our hearts and our minds, but we aren't like positively affirming and working towards. That is the most valuable thing that our community can do, which is to actually put their thoughts and the feelings they're holding in their heart into action.
Mm-hmm. And while, there's such rapid growth in the LGBTQ plus community, are our services keeping pace? Like you mentioned how synagogues and Jewish institutions, when June's coming up, right, they're all emailing you, hey, we want to do something for Pride Month. We want to bring in a speaker, right? We did the same thing. Do you feel that support systems like that and services are keeping pace, or do you think that it can be addressed differently or more effectively by our Jewish institutions?
I will tell you 100% that I have seen nothing less than an exponential growth year after year, especially in the mental health space where members are suffering. They are dealing with legislative attacks. They're dealing with anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, racism. There is an onslaught that's bubbling up all around our community, not to mention there's this sort of PTSD we all have from COVID. But there is nothing short of an absolute exponential growth of community members who are suffering, which is why we have so significantly increased the amount of support services that we have rolled out. And unfortunately, it's been, in terms of how the world is responding to the exponential growth that we are all rolling out, the support has only been incremental. So as things are so greatly exploding in terms of need, the funding, which is growing, is kind of just growing like this. And the support is kind of growing like this. And the actions are kind of just growing like this, but the need is like this. Yeah.
And is there a specific call to action that you can share with our viewers? Some who may work for Jewish institutions, be part of, large or small Jewish communities, that can be done, in real time.
Yeah, what's interesting to me, and I'll kind of do a little bit of a roundabout in answering that question. I walk into Jewish institutions all the time, and I sit across the table from clergy and educators, and they tell me how inclusive their institutions are. And I know that I'm sitting across the table from someone to believe themselves to be an ally and to be a supporter. And I talk about this a lot because I think it's really important to lift this up. I'll ask them 10 questions. Do you have LGBTQ inclusion policy statement? Are you doing safe school training with your educators? Do you speak from the pulpit around LGBTQ issues? 10 questions, and it's usually no to every single one of them, but they believe their institutions to be inclusive. And I know that I'm sitting across the table from a friend, but it's part of navigating that conversation and helping them understand that they are they're not necessarily really inclusive. They are tolerant. And while they care about this and they think about it, they're not actually doing the steps that are necessary. Are there quick and easy short steps that can be taken? Sure. But if you really want to lift up your community and care for the community that's a part of your, your queer community that's a part of your broader community, you need to do much more robust actions. You can bring us in to do a training. We can do that anywhere across the country, nationally. We have amazing clinical staff running support groups and running our trainings, running psychoeducational workshops, and we can work with your institution to think more dynamically about how to especially create a community care plan to support your LGBTQ folks, but just lift up the educational level of understanding what you can do. There's also making sure that you're, one of the things that when you're a Jewish person, you walk into a Jewish space, and you walk into a space and you see a mezuzah, you're like, oh, this is space I belong in. The same thing happens for queer people. Do you have rainbows up? Do you have rainbow flags? How are you we're all kind of trained to look around and see what are the symbols that are around? What are you doing to make sure those symbols are being lifted up in your spaces and in an affirming, but also really well-mannered way, not just putting a rainbow flag and saying, checking that box, but what does that all look like? Because it's really important for our community members to see this so they feel safe and feel comfortable, and they know this is a safe space where they can divulge their identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And, kind of going off the safe space topic and creating, welcoming and celebratory spaces for our Jewish community and our LGBTQ plus community, is there a seamless way to, create the LGBTQ plus Jewish community and then integrate them into the larger Jewish community so they don't feel so siloed? We have this for you, right? But then there's this other larger thing that we're doing. Yeah, how do we bring them into that larger space without siloing them?
I love that question. I mean, I can tell you that I've had this conversation with foundation partners over the years. They're like, when will you achieve your goal? And I'm like, when someone doesn't have to come out of the closet. I never thought, I'm in my late 40s, and I have to be honest, I never thought we would have had gay marriage in this country. I really am so shocked and amazed. And it's also now been several years. And while we're dealing with an onslaught of transphobic legislation out there, it's amazing to me that we have actually achieved some pieces of the work that we need to do. And so, sorry, refresh my memory. The question was
just how to take the Jewish LGBTQ plus community, bring them into the larger Jewish community without siloing them.
I think that, the truth is there's always going to be unique needs that our community members have. And so it's a balancing act. It's about building an arc of what it looks like, the experience for your community, where you're lifting up the role models and you're showing the community that these individuals have a place to belong. The truth is there's always going to be unique needs that need to be tended to. And you can't just say you're inclusive and check off a box. You actually have to do the work. And so I think it's a balancing act. You want to lift up LGBTQ people into different roles within leadership and make sure you have proud educators, clergy, whatnot, that are speaking, that set the sort of stage for it. And you want to encourage that. You don't want to just treat it as oh, it's a non-issue now. And so it's a balancing act. It's about, making sure you're lifting up the community, but also recognizing they have unique needs. Synagogues sometimes have men's clubs and women's clubs, or they have a preschool for kids. There's unique needs for different demographics. And so, but still you're a part of the whole community. So. Sure.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I think that makes total sense. And I wish more institutions had those opportunities. You mentioned, we've come a long way, right? Who knew gay marriage would be legal, alive, and well in our country. However, in the last year, frighteningly so, we have seen 491 anti-LGBTQ plus bills pop up across the country in this legislative session. Though we feel safe in California, right? And in our government, there's no denying that these actions affect our communities. What can we do about situations like the protests in the Glendale School District, where the school district is recognizing June as Pride Month And then there was this huge blowout and huge protests with parents coming in and saying, you know, no, like, this is not okay. You're sexualizing our kids. You're doing X, Y, and Z. You know, what do we do about that when we see so much progress and there's so much light in our future? But then here in California, where we feel so safe, maybe it doesn't feel so safe in these moments.
I would say it doesn't feel safe. And I think our entire community is feeling it. And it's actually causing, especially for our youth, the conversation that's constantly happening around them, which is not healthy, but unfortunately a part of our national conversation right now, or even happening in many places globally. It's very unhealthy. It is causing a lot of harm to our community members. And so those voices are unfortunately quite loud. And 491 anti-LGBTQ bills popping up, that is an onslaught. It is an unbelievable attack against our community, and our community is feeling it. They're feeling it around them constantly. They're not just experiencing the anti-Semitism that a lot of us are all experiencing as Jews. They're feeling the homophobia, the transphobia. They're feeling the racism. They're feeling the hate, and the hate is getting really loud. And, you know, I look, my brother and his husband, you know, live in a small town in the middle of the country, and you know, they have a daughter, and they told me a story last year about how on Mother's Day, my niece has two dads. On Mother's Day, they were doing Mother's Day's cards, and, you know, they were very quick to let her make Dad, you know, happy Father's Day cards on Mother's Day. Like, how simple is that? Like, where nothing sexualized about it. It's, forgive me, I'm sorry. It's just so dumb. There's nothing sexualized about like supporting the visibility of like how families are different in our community and lifting them up. And it's heartbreaking to me to know that here in a place like Los Angeles, that the anti-Semitism is blowing up, that the homophobia, the transphobia is blowing up. It's not just national, it's happening everywhere. And the only thing I can tell you that's going to make a difference is every single ally speaks up and speaks louder than the voices of hate. We have to all stand together and lift all the communities that are being targeted right now have to stand together, lift up, speak loudly, build bridges across communities, and see each other and support each other, and really put it into action to really speak about the importance of inclusion and the values around it. And I got to tell you, I think there are far more values in the Jewish community that support inclusion than exclusion. Absolutely. And at least the way I was raised in my Jewish experience growing up. And I would like for our community that has always been so social justice oriented, and so involved throughout the different times within American history towards pushing an agenda that reduces hate. We need to all stand together and continue to do that and speak loudly against these voices of hate that are getting louder and louder.
Absolutely. Like you said, I mean, the Jewish community has always been at the forefront of, you know, civil rights issues, Harvey Milk, right? Like all of these important folks who are trying to take hate, throw it out the window and replace it with love and acceptance. You touched upon my next question a little bit about allies. You know, like myself, I'm a huge ally of the LGBTQ plus community. And, you know, I personally want to know, and I'm sure others really want to know, you know, how can we play a meaningful role in supporting the overall well-being of the Jewish LGBTQ plus community and actively embracing them in, you know, all of these Jewish spaces, but just in the world, right? Overall. And I would love to hear some practical ways in which we can contribute to creating a more loving and accepting world.
I think talking about it is really important. I think that's the easiest and simple thing. We're good talkers, most of us anyways. You know, talking about it, lifting it up, making it a part of a conversation when it might not naturally be a part of conversation. If you see something that happens, like just, you know, as we try to address bullying in this country, like speaking up about it, not being silent about it. It's the same thing. Speaking up when you see something where another community member is being targeted, whether it's LGBTQ or not, anyone who's being marginalized, speaking up and saying, that's not okay. I think pushing the institutions you're involved with to do deeper work that involves educating the community around inclusion and actually doing the work of creating not just the safe space, but understanding like how you really can serve the community, you know, understanding its unique needs and really lifting those up. I think that also, we should be louder politically and speaking to our representatives around these issues of what we're dealing with. And I'll also tell you, like, I'm just going to be blunt, very blunt about it.
Please bring it on.
The Jewish Federation did this amazing study this past couple of years on what the demographics look like in our community. And it is eye-opening.
Yeah.
It's absolutely eye-opening, understanding like how many of our community members are Jews of color, how many households have LGBTQ community members. 14% of households in Los Angeles reported that they had an LGBTQ community member.
Huge.
Just think about how many parents don't actually know that their child is gay or lesbian until they're an adult. And just the fact that it's 14% right now, that's a mind-shattering like number to me. And there are other studies that are showing that young teens and young adults are identifying at LGBTQ at rates in the 20%, in the category of 20 to 22%. Yeah. So with that being said, just to bluntly say, like, it's affecting all of us. It's affecting our entire community. And we all need to be those role models and speak up. Even if we don't have a queer kid, we need to speak up for what might be 3 generations from now when you have a queer child, queer grandchild, queer great-grandchild, or your friend who has a queer child. We all need to be speaking up and sharing these stories and talking about why it's important and not just being passive about it. And you could all call if you have capacity, you could be donating to LGBTQ causes. You could be encouraging your family foundations that you might be involved with to donate. I mean, the Chronicle of Philanthropy had an article last week about how the LGBTQ community receives less than 1% of philanthropic charitable gifts in this country. But in a very modest amount, we're between 14 and 20% of the population. So as we spoke about it earlier, exponential growth, there's only been incremental growth and support. Start pushing your individuals that you have in your network that can be more supportive and ask them to increase their support of the LGBTQ community. We really need your support more now than ever.
Absolutely. And we talked about it a little bit earlier, and you brought it up again with the funding needs and challenges. What are some specific funding needs and gaps that exist in these spaces, and how could potential funders be encouraged to prioritize these causes?
Well, I think the study that came out, should be sufficient enough for people to have like this sort of based understanding of like how we need to shift the priorities of like the way we're looking at this work currently. But I can tell you that we are increasing the support we do in the mental health space drastically, but we don't have the funding. Like, we have some really amazing partners, from the Weinberg Family Foundation to a variety of foundations that are supporting our work. And it's really great that it's growing, but the need is so much more. And I have to be honest with you, the support space, the support wing of our 3 pillars of work that we do, the support and wellness, is by far the most expensive piece, and it is growing exponentially. So talk about gaps. There's a gap in the funding. There's no shortage of finding clinical staff that are culturally competent to do this work. And there's no supporters of people turning to us for the support and turning to our helpline and asking us for help. But where is the support coming to us philanthropically to really make sure that we can do this work and serve the most vulnerable in our community?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that. Really, really appreciate it. I believe we have some questions in our Q&A from the audience, and so I'd love to get to those. First question from David Goldstein. Thank you so much. What challenges does the Orthodox Jewish community raise for your organization?
Well, one challenge is there's not just one Orthodox community. There's many. So it's that they're trying to get into each of these different communities is a challenge. And I think that, we run our own Orthodox and non-Orthodox, Orthodox and formally Orthodox program, as well as have offered support services in that space. I think that getting the visibility and allowing people to know that we exist when they won't talk about it is very challenging. And unfortunately, we very often are called in a moment of crisis instead of a moment of proactivity, which is like, still, to be honest, an issue across the spectrum. Even in the Jewish community, we're very often more likely called in a crisis because there's an issue in a day school or an issue in a Hillel or whatnot that happened. And so, but I think within the Orthodox space, that's the most challenging space to be visible in. And also the fact that, you know, we have conversations with Orthodox rabbis behind closed doors where they say they're aware that their community is suffering, but they can't necessarily speak publicly and supportive around it. I think the only way that, and I've heard this advice from, you know, within the Orthodox community, the only way we're going to shift that is when the community members push for it. And we're seeing that. We're seeing like parents step up because their child is suffering or has been excluded or pushed out of the community in the Orthodox space or in other traditional communities, the Mizrahi community, Persian community. We're seeing that. And the only way you're really going to push that the only way you're going to make that change happen is really pushing the parents, I think, of those LGBTQ members to join together and join forces with the clergy to push the conversation, at the very least, just from the Jewish values of like preserving life and protecting life. Whether you're gonna, as an Orthodox institution, maybe one day they'll do gay marriages. We'll see, but that would be wonderful. But at the very least, there's a lot of real pain in the community and a lot of people who are really suffering. And if you really want to, if you want to look after your community as community leadership or as parents, you need to start the conversation about what it means to create safer space for those community members and do it in doses that like allow the community to move and to progress.
Absolutely. And, you know, like you mentioned, the Orthodox spaces in JQ International, it's one of those subsects that you've really grown out to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the very diverse community, which is the LGBTQ plus community. Something that I know just from, you know, my friends and family who are part of the community, gay men often take over a lot of what's visible and what's seen. And I'm curious, you know, for them, you've mentioned how you really tried to bring women to the forefront, right? Like bring them on the boards, make sure they're an integral part of the organization. I'm curious what other ways that you are trying to, you know, expand the network and ensure that everyone feels like they can be a part of JQ International.
Well, we try very hard to walk the talk. You know, we're a DEI organization. We are trying to increase the diversity and inclusion within our community. And we try to do that within our own organization, both from looking at like our professional team to our volunteers to our board. And we are always trying to be as diverse as possible. And also keeping those unique spaces, those safe spaces like women's specific programming that is thriving within JQ. I get to go as like CEO, and it's a lot of fun to go to. We call them Hebrew Shabbats, and it's a lot of fun to go to a Hebrew Shabbat. I may be the only cis male there, but it's something beautiful and magical, and to see a thriving community that wants to bring Jewish ritual into their life and has a safe space to do that. There is not a lot of lesbian spaces in our world. Like, you're right. The gay men absolutely dominate, especially this sort of the meeting spaces within the just general queer community are very dominated by gay men. But through having specific programming like we have with our women's community or trans and non-binary, those communities are able to flourish and see themselves reflected. And it's to be honest, it's almost an escape, because they live in a world where it is just so much of who they are is going against the grain, and or they're not really seeing themselves represented. But to create a space where trans and non-binary community Jews can come together and have Shabbat or do a cultural program. Yeah. It's an amazing thing to see, because it's unique, and it's like, where else are you going to get that but JQ? And for me, it's a point of pride that like we have been able to maintain this, because it's a lot to have all these series of different programs for all these different communities, plus the programming at large. It's a lot of person power to make sure that happens and that it's done well and culturally competently.
Amazing. Talk to me a little more about programs. WeHo Pride was just this weekend. Tell me about your involvement in that.
Well, we had a group marching, and we also had our event we had our brunch that we have overlooking our space in West Hollywood overlooks the parade route. And so we were able to have two simultaneous programs. The professional team, Jane Emenpour and Emily and Abrams and Sydney Harrison did an amazing job organizing us having two dual programs happening at once. 150 people. It was amazing. Wow. And our space is a little small.
Incredible.
But it was amazing. There was so much Jewish joy, and to see our teens marching and the parents coming out to support the teens, some of them marching with the teens, some of the parents waiting in our space and joining us for the brunch while their teens did the march. It was so beautiful about it. And there was so much joy and celebration. And our community needs that right now.
Yeah.
Especially our youth. They really need that right now when, again, they're hearing all around them all these attacks against who they are and their identity, and people making comments that are just inappropriate, that are hurting the youth and young adults in our community.
Definitely. And, on your staff, I was curious, do you have someone who is, whether you want to call them an expert or a Jewish educator, because there's so much literature that's coming out nowadays, like the Trans Talmud that just came out recently from a professor at the University of Arizona talking about the history of trans folk in Judaism, and just tons and tons of literature coming out and a lot of really great educational resources. Are there people on your staff or do you facilitate those kinds of opportunities as well?
There's a wealth not just of community members that are bringing a lot of their Judaic expertise to our community, both staff and volunteers and board members. Mm-hmm. But there is a wealth of people wanting leadership opportunities. Awesome. It's amazing. There's something about JQ. We're very blessed. There's something about JQ that creates such a sacred space and inclusive space and a space where people can really feel themselves. It's so inspiring. And we've seen a really great opportunity to invest in conversations around Jewish values for inclusion, and creating tools and programs and whatnot that can be brought out to the Jewish community at large. We're really excited. We're going to be hiring for the first time a full-time teen professional that will work with us to be out in the field to join all the different youth groups and synagogues and camps and whatnot that are asking us to be more present, to bring our expertise in, and feel very excited about that. And so education, formal or informal or experiential, bringing in the Judaism, all of it, it's fun to do this work. Mm-hmm. It's fun to build out what it looks like. There's so much to play with in a good way, to really bring in, a lot of Judaism and a lot of Jewish culture, that we feel very blessed, and a lot of people wanting to step up and help. And so we have a wealth of that.
Amazing. That's fantastic. I want to turn to another question in our Q&A chat from the audience. An anonymous attendee, whoever you may be, asked, what's the latest on adoption through surrogacy for LGBTQ plus Jews in Israel, since you're an international organization?
What's the latest? I'm not sure I can answer that question. I can tell you that what we're worried about in Israel is this current administration. There's a lot of government funding that's happening that's serving the LGBTQ community in Israel, and there's been a lot of movement in that regard. However, there is a lot of risk right now, and there's been a lot of attacks and increased hate and conversation that is really threatening our siblings in Israel in the LGBTQ front. And so we're deeply concerned about that. We're deeply concerned because these are life-saving support services that are being made available, safe spaces for youth. Yes, there has been some changes that I don't think have actually been actualized, but some changes in support of surrogacy and whatnot for the gay community, for gay men. But there's still surrogacy issues and obstacles in general in Israel, whether you're straight or LGBTQ, cis, whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you do work in Israel as well? Do you facilitate programming or have folks over there?
So, we were a part of creating the first LGBTQ birthright trips, or work with JDC Entwine to create an LGBTQ leadership programs. I would say the most people are accessing us from Israel right now might be through our support services, and also bringing in different speakers as educational individuals to do the work that we're doing. In actual programming in Israel, there's a plethora of organizations doing amazing work. And so if someone's interested in getting involved in that, I'd be very happy to help facilitate introduction.
Fantastic. And now one last question before we head out. I'm curious to know your thoughts on the recent White House initiative to their plan, their plan against hate towards Jews, anti-Semitism, right? They had this comprehensive laid out plan to fight anti-Semitism. Where is that plan for LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters?
That's a great question. I was reading the press, I think it was the press release that came out of the White House, and talking about how when Biden came in, he was recalling on the marches, the anti-Semitic marches by neo-Nazis, and like how we have to take a lot of significant proactive steps to like combat that. It's a great question. Where is it for the LGBTQ community? And maybe we feel like gay marriage is safe for right now, but come on, 491 anti-LGBTQ bills. I don't know. That's a challenging thing, and we need leadership that's going to step up and create that. And I would like to see that have that happen. But I think that that's such a fracture point of political activism between the parties and the states and the federal government right now, that it's explosive. And so I think it's easy to say, whether you're on the left or the right, we need to do something about anti-Semitism. But I think it's very hard to be bipartisan around supporting the LGBTQ community. And the only way that's going to happen is when the voices of our community members and our allies raise up their concerns and push for it to their representatives. And we need them to be loud and vigilant about that. Because without that, unfortunately, we're so fractured right now. We are so fractured as a nation. And it's to me an absolute crime in itself that we're politicizing and creating all these attacks against those who are the most marginalized in our community. And to me, it's so reminiscent of 1930s Germany. I'm sorry. It's so reminiscent of using somebody to pick on for political gain. History repeats itself, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And as Jews, we know we're supposed to be a light unto the nations. We're supposed to stand up for those who hate is being, thrown against them. And we're just supposed to be an example. And I think you've really, shared practical ways that we can do that as a Jewish community, from the institutional level to just as individuals and allies. But thank you again, Asher. I really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing this information, and happy Pride.
Thank you. It was an honor.